be providing a link for the meeting. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat, and Todd and I are working together to try to make sure that we get your questions answered. And so here we go. So first of all, coming into today, if you're not there already, go to Poll Everywhere or pollev.com/Erin Hartman 662 and just weigh in on where you're at right now. This is completely anonymous, so we want an honest viewpoint of where people are at. I'll give you a second to respond to that. So Todd and I, of course, are feeling good about standards-based grading. We are already implementing this in our classrooms. And we just want to share the experiences, like I said, of some other teachers and maybe hopefully give you a little bit broader perspective of where we're at. So I appreciate you weighing in. And we are going to go ahead and first kind of recap where we were last time. So if you attended last time, or even if you didn't, these are the things that we talked about. If you want to go back and view that, you can. There is a link that will be available, or we will make available to you so that you're able to see that later. But what we did last time was kind of like a nuts and bolts. Here's the basics of standards-based grading. So looking at your standards, identifying power standards, unpacking them if necessary so that you're clear on what you're measuring, reviewing your curriculum to match those assessments to those power standards, creating a grade for each standard, weighting those grades in PowerSchool and Canvas, and then assigning standards grades after reviewing assessments. So it was very practical, and we got a lot of questions from people afterwards about maybe how they did it or how it went. And so that's where this this workshop today came from, was so that you could hear a little bit more from some of the other stakeholders in our community. All right, so today we are going to cover three things, and then whatever additional questions that you might have. We're going to hear from some other teachers about what they saw as benefits of standards-based grading in their classroom. We're going to hear what some of the obstacles were that they've had to overcome and how they did it. And we're also going to hear some success stories. So at the end of the day, some positive impacts that standards-based grading has had in classrooms across the district. But first, we wanted to give Mr. Anderson an opportunity to speak on this because there is some leadership behind the standards-based grading. So I'll go ahead and hit play, and we'll hear from him.
Hello, Elkhart High School. Kerry Anderson here. I wanted to just take a brief moment to share my thoughts regarding standards-based grading / mastery learning. You know, from the student perspective, it's about mastery learning. From the teacher's perspective, it's about standards-based grading. But they really do mean the same thing. Since last March, we've been in this new world. You know, in that day when everything pretty much changed for us, the way teachers taught and the way students learned literally changed overnight. And as we become more familiar with meeting the new needs of our students and our world right now, the standards-based grading mastery learning is definitely the vision that we have moving forward. Needless to say, we have many teachers who have taken that leap right now, since we've been doing it since March, and we're still doing it right now, figuring out how to embed those practices in the day-to-day routines and the day-to-day instructional practices that you use that connects to the student's learning. You know, old school, if a student, started a year with a 0, got a 70 on the middle test and ended with 100, you average those out, that student failed. I would suggest to anybody, I think everyone would know, that if you really had a 0, 70, and 100, that student had growth. It shouldn't be about averages. And did they really meet the learning expectations at the end of that grading period, semester, that year, whatever the course may be? I think everyone would say yes to that. And I know that our teachers are doing wonderful things to meet the kids where they are. Sometimes we all know that kids learn at little different speeds. We need to figure out interventions and supports for students. And I think standards-based grading / mastery learning is definitely a very positive thing for our Elkhart High School students. And don't see that changing. We'll continue to provide opportunities to learn more about this. I know it's a work in progress. Got to figure out how it connects in Canvas, to Power School, of course, but I don't see that. I don't see us moving away from that. So I guess I just appreciate everyone who's already kind of jumped on board and tried to figure this out. Again, we've been doing this since March, so it hasn't changed. In the old way of teaching and learning, I think the pandemic has showed different ways to doing that. And I think we have to do this in a thoughtful manner. But as we move forward in the schools of study in the freshman division, I think everything's going to change. And it's our job to do it the right way, take our time to figure that out, but to move forward and do education differently. And that's what we're all trying to do. So appreciate everyone's commitment to this. Go Lions.
All right, so at the outset, that's our point of view, that we are wanting to help people be able to assess students authentically and be able to measure growth. And so let's go ahead and hear from some of the other, excuse me, sorry about that, some of the other teachers that are involved. So the first thing we're going to do, we've got a series of little videos. They're just 2 minutes apiece, where you're going to hear from some of the other teachers in the district, specifically at the secondary level, about how they're using this in their classroom. And this first little blurb, we asked the teachers, what was your motivation to start standards-based grading? And I would pose the question to those of you that have logged in today. What is your motivation to learn more about standards-based grading? So here we go.
Well, I'd been thinking about it for about a year prior, about how that would change things. The typical point-based grading and just trying to tack assignment onto assignment onto assignment, I felt was having an impact on the end of semesters, where students who had struggled couldn't efficiently improve their grade. They couldn't demonstrate their skills, especially if they got behind. So I wanted to streamline the class in such a way that they only had, they could quantify like these 6 or 7 things are what you need to be able to show me this semester. And you can show me this one by doing these tasks. You can show me this one by doing these tasks. And I felt it made it way more clear, and in such a way that even if they had gotten behind, they knew what they had to do. They had a better strategy for how they could.
I'm a firm believer anytime a district means it, like says it once, that it's going to come down the pipeline. So I wanted to have enough time to be able to practice it and apply it before it was going to be something that was mandated throughout the district.
Did find is that they became more independent with their learning, since they knew, what standards they needed to master. So they knew exactly what they needed to be working on, and then they could email me and say that they needed to work on this assignment because they needed to work on that standard, or ask what they needed to do to master that standard. So it was pretty clear to them what they needed to work on. So that was nice.
All right, so we heard a couple things about benefits that students experienced, and we want to throw this back out to you guys. So this is the next question that's in the poll. And the question is, what is your motivation to learn more about standards-based grading? So why are you here today? Now, keep in mind that you'll be able to vote up or down on these other things that people said. So you'll see the items pop up, and then you can either give it a thumbs up if you agree, or you can give it a thumbs down if you disagree. Again, we're trying to get the temperature of the room and see what your questions are and what your motivations are, so we can better help as we move forward. So I'll give you a minute or two to respond here.
So anybody can type a response. It's not just those that are on there.
Right.
So feel free to type your own response, and then you can comment or like up or down the other responses.
Thanks, Todd, for clarifying. I'm going to give about 60 more seconds here. And you can also see, we'll scroll down and kind of take a look at what some of the other things are on your screen. You'll be able to see those other items as well. All right, so it looks like our number one response here is, I want the grades to reflect what they know, not just when they know it. Seeing what other teachers are doing, if this is the way we're going, how to best approach it. And it looks like we've got quite a few other items on here, all very positive. So we are, and look at those negative ones got voted down at the very bottom. So that's good. So I'm glad to hear what things that are on your minds. And what we're going to do next is talk about what are some obstacles, because it's not a end all be all. It's not a fix everything. There are some things that people have run into. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that.
That currently I don't think Sarah is doing it at Memorial. So I'm the only one. Mm-hmm. So getting other, nobody in my department is doing it.
Okay.
So having to find somebody else, we weren't privy to the knowledge. The only reason I know you guys are doing some of that training is because Sasha Wilson has told me.
Okay.
And so knowing where to get help,
sure,
but some guidance maybe.
Yeah.
If you're considering doing it for the first time, I think the most important thing is to not pick too many standards. The first 9 weeks when I did it, I did too many, and it was hard. It was hard for me. The kids didn't really understand that it was probably a little bit hard for them too, but it was hard for me to juggle and try to get all the standards in. But the second 9 weeks and then this 9 weeks, I've cut it back, and it's really helped me focus even more. And I feel like the kids are able to learn those things a lot better.
For me, the pitfall, I think, to look out for is being too rigid. So standards-based grading is, from my experience, very flexible. And I have had every year of my 4 years ideas about how I want to do things for assessments and so on. And for the most part, that works great, but you're just going to have some units. You're just going to have some times where things are not going to be easy on you to do it in the way that you originally expected and wanted. But there are many ways you can assess students and teach students and get the understanding of what they know with standards-based grading. And so to be kind to yourself, be kind to your students, and then comes with that, because if you're kind to yourself, then automatically you're kind to your students.
All right, so we've heard some positives. We've heard some potential pitfalls, and it sounds like you guys have some good questions about where to go from here. And so this next question is, what are your biggest concerns regarding standards-based grading? So we pre-filled this with some of the things that we've heard from other teachers. If you have, if one of these is your biggest concern, you can choose that. Or if you have a different concern that's not listed, if you would click on other and then put what your concern is in the chat box, because this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. We may not have all of the answers, but we certainly want to know what questions are out there and see if we can help find some answers for you. So again, if you're putting other on the screen, if you would please put what your concern is in the chat so that we can go on and address some of those, at least to see where you guys are at. Sorry, Jenna, we didn't have the option to do multiple answer, but maybe if you want to put on, and this goes for anybody, not just Jenna, but maybe if you want to put in the chat, like if there's more than one that you're concerned about, like what are your top concerns?
Kyle, that's a very good one, and something we'll have to definitely dive into to figure that one out.
Thank you.
That is not one that personally I've had a question about recently. I don't know about Erin, but yeah, that's a very good one.
I'm going to wait another minute or two. I know some people might just be processing, trying to think what they want to say. I want to give you an opportunity to do that and not rush past. So I'll wait another minute or two, and then we'll see if we can address some of those items in the chat. All right, so I just want to take a few minutes and try to address some of these. So if I'm speaking to something that, you know, you have someone in the meeting has an answer to, or you have a further question, feel free to unmute yourself and interject. And Todd, you as well, since I know you've had experience in your classroom. But I'm just going to start at the top of the list here. And Brittany Townsley said, my concern is wondering if I'm structuring my SBG procedures in my classroom the best way to meet the needs of my students. I think one of the things that Heather Fellows said in the last video is really important, in that there's not necessarily one way to do standards-based grading. And the fact that you're thinking about those things indicates that you're a reflective practitioner, and we're all just trying to get a little better, you know, with each day. If we feel like we've, you know, hit the apex, then it might be time to do some soul searching. So I think that's a valid question. And, you know, hopefully there will be some additional resources that we and the district can help with as we move forward here. Yeah, Kyle's question on incorporating co-curricular events. I think that I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not a music teacher. I don't know how your courses are structured right now, other than you're saying all concerts are required. But to me, if something is required, the concert itself is like an assessment. And so then therefore, if the student comes, participates, does what they're, you know, supposed to do, whatever the expectations are, then that's an assessment of where they're at on that standard. If they don't come, they don't get credit for that standard. Now, in a standards-based grading situation, then you want to be able to give them an alternative way to make that up. So maybe it's like you come to the concert, or you participate in this many, you know, advisory sessions, one-on-one. Like, again, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your classroom, just kind of brainstorming. The way it would work for me, like a similar idea would be, you know, the final test that the students take. If they take the test and they've demonstrated the standards and they earn those points, great. If they don't take the test, they don't get the points for the standards unless there's another way that they can demonstrate it. So maybe thinking about some other ways that they can demonstrate that. Of course, you want to make sure you have all your kids at the concert. You still use your same language as far as this is required, this is the expectation. But then when the kids don't come, giving them, or if, you know, there's a illness situation, giving them the opportunity to have some sort of alternative assessment. Do you want to speak to that at all, Kyle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, those are excellent points. And of course, there's a lot more in our music curriculum than just concerts. It's not the whole 100% of the grade. So there would be other things that we do that certainly standards-based grading will work very well for. But that's just the one that, and you hit on everything really well, because if it's really clear that, oh, well, they can make it up, what are we going to run into more attendance issues? Sure. And of course, if there's a verified illness, we work with that anyway. Or a verified family emergency of some kind. We always work with that. So yeah, I think you have good points, and I think that can spark good discussion for us on how to approach this.
Yeah. I know that the attendance at the concert is so important because of all of the parts that go into whether it's a choir, or orchestra, or band. And so I think you stick with the same language and the expectation. It just might be the way it looks in your grade book might just be a little bit different. I don't think that needs to necessarily change the way that you do things. And that's what I found for myself is it just made me kind of rethink how and why I do everything, and giving everything a little bit more of a purpose, but not necessarily having to shake everything up. Sasha said, making sure that students comprehend the language shift in SBG model versus that of traditional. Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of what we were just talking about, like the language of providing evidence to show that you mastered the standards, still having those expectations. It is a little bit of shift. Sometimes the students will still say, well, how many things do I need to complete? Like how many assignments? Well, now I can say you're missing this standard, this standard, this standard. We need evidence for that. So what evidence can we show, or what evidence can you complete in order to demonstrate that mastery? So yeah, the language shift is important. And I think as more people are doing this in their classrooms, it will become more of a common part of the vernacular of students as well. Bill Nieder says, how to use standards-based grading with extremely vague and general state standards. So I think that's a perfect opportunity because you can make it what you want it to be. So this is where it comes to unpacking the standards. I haven't personally looked at the music standards, which I know, Bill, is what you're teaching. But you think about what standards are important to you that in the classroom that mesh with what the state is saying, and then that's what you express to the students, and that's what you measure. And I think unpacking the standards comes along with that. Is there anything you want to add as far, like I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. Is there anything you want to add, Bill? Okay. Jenna Nelson says, will I have to maintain 2 grade books, one for EHS and one for Ivy Tech? I don't know the answer to that from Ivy Tech's perspective. What I will tell you is that I personally have taught dual credit with standards-based grading for IU in the ACP program. And basically, I just worked it out. So you're required to use their grade weights. Yeah. So similar idea with IU as far as what I'm required to do. The way standards-based grading looks in my ACP classes is a little bit different than how it looks in my regular econ classes. The way that their grades are weighted at IU, and again, I don't know what Ivy Tech's grade weights are, but the way that their the way the grades are weighted at IU, there's heavy emphasis on the tests, and the tests contain all of the information that basically are the standards that IU has laid out for the course. And so the way that my ACP course is assessed is that the tests are heavily weighted. That becomes the standards-based part of it. So my grade books are set up differently between those 2 courses, but I don't have 2 separate grade books for a course, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Jenna, or did you have a follow-up question? All right, Kylie says, even after modeling, it's hard to motivate students. Oh, Jenna says, I suppose I'll have to ask my supervisor for my VTech. Yeah, again, I don't have a better answer for that, but what I can tell you from my personal experience was essentially college is already doing standards-based grading in that they're heavily weighting the tests. And I have to follow those same policies. It's not as flexible as my regular econ classes because I have to abide by the standards of the university. So Kylie says, even after modeling, it's hard to motivate students to give with feedback and to revise assignments. It's a mind shift for them. How can I help them adjust to this change? Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like they've been conditioned to work towards the average because that's how courses have been set up their entire, school experience so far. And so it's kind of like what Sasha was saying. It is a shift, but I have found that when the light bulb comes on for students, they respond really well as far as, you mean I don't have to do these 20 assignments just to pass. I have to do these specific assignments to show what I learned. And then if I want to do more than that, I can. Some will do the minimum, just like in a regular grading situation. But that's a really good point. Eric says, How do SBG and Pbl fit together? Yeah, so project-based learning is also a big push. And I think the question there is looking at the Pbl and what standards can you incorporate with that Pbl and use that to assess. So I'm still working on project-based learning in my classroom. I don't have a lot of experience with that specifically, but as I'm planning ahead, looking next year at the schools of study, when I sat down and looked at the state standards across the curriculum, the more general kind of literacy-based standards, as well as I know in science, in your area, Eric, like the scientific processes standards, they all kind of are pushing at the same sorts of things, asking students to use critical thinking skills and analysis, and that fits right in with what you're asking kids to do in project-based learning. So again, I think it's not so much reinventing, it's looking at how can we make these things work together. Did you have follow-up with that, Eric? Okay.
Erin, do you mind if I jump in on Angela?
No, go for it.
So Angela, I have quite a few special education students in my freshman geography. And one of the things that we've done is, and Erin alluded to this, is when we're unpacking the standards, right? We're taking some of that verbiage that the state puts together and we're making it more user-friendly. And so when it comes to the special education students in geography, we may not focus on all of the standards when it comes to as much time as we're spending on them. We may have a different assignment that can help those special education students maybe get 2 or 3 standards instead of them taking a multiple choice test to see if they've learned that material. We may have those one-on-one conversations. I would suggest if we're looking at it in a core discipline, that we're hoping that the students and, the teachers have unpacked the standards. And then I think that makes it easier for the teacher and the students at the same time. Angela, I saw you unmuted. Do you have a question, comment?
Well, I'm going to. So if you have more to add, go ahead.
No, by all means, go ahead.
Okay, so I do work with some teachers that have my special education kids that are using standards-based grading. And I have found that almost none of my special ed kids know how to bring up Canvas and show me what they need to do to show mastery. So, for example, Kyle has shared his Canvas with me and put me on it so that I can kind of dig through it and figure it out and help the kids. I would say of the teachers that I've asked to include me on their Canvas classes, about half of the teachers are very agreeable to doing that. So if I can't access their Canvas class, then I have to depend on students to share their screen or their account with me so I can look at the standards, look what they need to do to show mastery, and then provide additional instruction. And it's really hard work if I don't have access to what the kids are working on and the assignments or assessments that evaluate where their weaknesses are. So I don't necessarily even know where their weaknesses are, and I can email and show up in person and strongly encourage teachers to share that information with me. But if they decline, then I'm not able to help my kids easily.
And Angela, I'm going to turn this over to Brian Bennett because he has raised his hand very high to help answer this question.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry I'm late. So there's a couple things, and I've been in the chat as well. Like, these are some of the systems level things that we're talking about. So Angela, your concern is 100% valid, because if we're not all on the same page with how we're reporting, and that's what standards-based is, we're reporting what students know and can do, and the standards is the reference point. And so Kristen asked, like, my standards are either really verbose, like the math and science, or there's a very few and there's other skills that go into that. So as we get towards this, we're going to have a system and expectations for teachers to be reporting what students know and can do. There's also things in Canvas that, like the Mastery Gradebook, we haven't talked about that at all yet. There are systems in place and structures in Canvas that you can use that will give you that information without extra work from the teacher to interpret those assignments. Because you're right, when I look at a particular assignment, if I'm not that core teacher, I don't know how to assess whether or not that student is actually performing to the standard. So there's training, there's some PD that's going to be coming. And I want to ask a question later, though, about what that training looks like for staff to kind of get to that point where a teacher feels comfortable using the built-in tools to report what students know, so that people in SPED or in ENL or in whatever can actually look at a course that a teacher has shared and actually learn something about what interventions that student needs. Does that make sense?
Yes. Is there a way, though, that I can get access to classes and all of that if a teacher decides not to share Canvas?
Well, there's no reason the teacher should have Canvas not shared. Like, that's another issue. So if you're asking staff for access so that you can help their students and they're saying no, then you need to talk with your administrator, because if you can't do your job, that's a bigger problem.
Okay, so then once I get access granted, then there are things in place in Canvas that will help me.
Yes, if the staff member is using those, then yes. And that's part of the training, is we have to get people trained on what tools are available and should be used to get that information into something that's usable.
Okay.
Because what we need, and you know this with your students, you can sit down with any one of your students and say, this person knows X, Y, and Z, this person knows D, E, and F. But because it's all in our heads, because we work with our kids, we need to expose that using some of the Canvas tools, and it's all learnable. Like, I can teach you all of that stuff. And we just need to make sure that we're very clear in what those expectations are and what we're reporting and how. But yeah, okay, it's all right there.
Thank you.
And that will come in SBG 3.0 as we move into later in the spring. Anybody have any questions or comments on anything that Brian just shared? All right, I believe we're at Kelly Harrington now. Are students allowed to skip, create the final work, and then just wait until I'm ready to move on until the next unit of instruction? I think this is a hard one, because I think as we think through this, we can all see this scenario, right? The kid that does nothing does the test at the end. So I think we need to really think, and Kelly, I'm not familiar with your course or anything, so bear with me. I think if we really think about what does authentic assessment look like, what are some little check-ins we can do along the way to ensure that students are engaged, et cetera. But when it comes to the end, and I'm going to move on to Steve's a little bit with this. So if a student, and this comes back to the weighting of how you want to weight standards-based, and we'll talk about that later as well. So if a student does not do the assignment and gets a 0 out of 20, they're not going to get rewarded for not doing an assignment. They're still going to get a 0. But we're making those assignments worth less percentage points. They're weighted less than the standards. So if the student comes back later on and does his test, let's say, and gets all the questions right that relate to the same standards as the assignment, they might get that 2 out of 3. But if the standards are weighted at 75% or 80%, they're going to get a better grade, because we're showing what they know, not what they didn't do necessarily. And so I don't know if that makes sense or answers either Kelly or Steve's question. But again, those are some things that we're still working out. What percentages are best for standards? Is it an 80-20? Is it 75-25, et cetera?
Continuing with Kelly's concern, because there's some related concerns further down with Heather Ashton, both Kelly and Heather teach art. The idea here, again, a lot of it is just a change in the language that we use and just being a little bit more purposeful about what we're asking the kids to do and what that evidence points to. So whether you're using a test or a project, you're assessing what the kids learn. So in some classes, it may be that the test is tied with various standards. In an art class, it may be that the project that they do is tied with one standard. If they do the project, they get the points for the project, plus you verify that they learned the standard. If they don't do the project, they still don't get the points. If it's a case of a kid with an IEP or an ILP, maybe there's or there was an illness or something, then maybe there's an alternative way that you can assess, or maybe they just have to go back and complete that assessment in order to get the standard. But either way, what you're saying is, okay, for standard 2.1, I don't have any evidence that you mastered this. And so we need to get some evidence. So Kelly, I think, asked a follow-up question. Seems like we're doing both points-based and standards-based. And the answer to that is yes. Like Todd mentioned, there's weighting involved so that the standards, the evidence of learning is weighted more heavily than whether the student completed every single assignment. They still get zeros. They're still penalized if they don't do something. But there are multiple pathways to show that they mastered the material. And once you start digging into that in your class, it can feel like a really big shift. I know I talked with Brian about it for like a year and a half before I finally jumped into the deep end. But once I made the shift, everything made more sense to me. And everything made more sense to my students and their parents. There were a couple questions in there about explaining to parents, and that's absolutely correct. We need to be sharing that information with parents. We're already doing that to an extent. You share, for example, in your syllabus how you grade. This is the same sort of idea. So, if there's a video that you put out there at the beginning of the semester so that parents know what to expect, that's an opportunity that you can use to talk about standards-based grading. But on the system level, if there's something that we're going to be doing systemically, then yes, that would be a shift. And I don't know the background of that. I don't know, Brian, maybe if you can speak on that. Like, are we going to each choose? Is there going to be a system? Like,
so we're going in terms of the gradebook structure, you mean?
Right.
Yeah. So I've been talking with Carrie Anderson about what this is going to look like, and we need to define expectations. But the point is, and I've been in the chat and I can't quite type fast enough sometimes, is we need to move away from the completion-based grade. And someone kind of alluded to this already, but if I have a student who does none of the work but flies through all my tests, right? And we've all had those kids where I had a student one year who knew the chemistry, like they knew what they were doing, and they worked on their Spanish during my class, and they weren't a distraction because they needed extra time in Spanish, but they knew my material. Does that student get penalized for not doing chemistry during my class period? Not necessarily. I mean, there are some issues with that, and we had to work with them. But the point being, if you have a student who knows the material, but they don't do the paperwork, like that student should be passing your class, period. That's what we need to get away from, is we have students who aren't doing the paperwork, and so they are being penalized to the point where they are failing classes, even though they know the material. That's what standards-based helps us eliminate, is we're reporting what a student knows and can do. And the particulars of where we set standards and mastery is different for everyone. If I'm teaching an AP level class, my standards are going to be a little bit higher in terms of what mastery looks like versus a repeater integrated chem physics, where those students need to demonstrate credit to pass. And that comes at the department level, at the guiding coalition level, part of your school. Like there's other issues there. So I can't say everyone is using these percentages. But we are going to be working with the district leadership and with Carrie and the DCs to figure those questions out. I think we are looking right now. Okay, so Jenna just asked passing with what kind of grade. Here, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Like the questions right now are very, very granular. We are all asking super specific, hyper-focused questions on my situation. What we need to get to as a district is, yes, this is a good idea because it benefits our students. And when you talk with parents, And if I sit down and a parent says, I don't understand your grading, and I say, okay, your student doesn't understand this, so they have many chances to show me they understand it. And when they understand it, they get full credit. And mom and dad are like, cool, that sounds great. And they move on. Like, that's the discussion, literally. You know, and there's other things, and I'm sure I missed some in the chat about responsibility and teaching students to be like productive and whatever. I think those are all things, like if I do a crappy job at my job, my principal or my boss comes and says, you need to do this better, and I do it again. That's responsibility. That's what standards-based grading is getting to. If they do something poorly, I give them feedback and they do it again, and then I reassess it. My pay doesn't change based on how well or poorly I do my job. If I do my job and I show mastery at my job, I get paid. My students, if they do their work, like if that's part of it, but then they show me they know it, then they pass. Full credit. I can't say you know this 80% of the way, you know it. So what I want to get back to is, like, in the particulars about, and I missed the first 20 minutes, so if this has already been done, we really wanted to show how different people do it differently. So in math science, it's very procedural. You have to know skill A before you can do skill B, because if you don't know A, you can't do B, period. So what does standards-based look like in that kind of system versus art, history, music, where things cycle a little bit more, where we're always looking at culture, or we're talking about speech or parts of language or theory or whatever it happens to be. So like which group did we end on? Is it like, we've got 15 minutes left. What group do we need to see next, Todd?
Well, what I was going to say is, and I think all the questions and comments are great, but as you did, we have 15 minutes left. So just understand that some of the questions that are being asked are about, well, how much are we weighting things? How does this work in Canvas? How do I do this and that? And those are things that we're going to talk about. We really wanted today to show those that are like, wow, how do I do this in English? And we're going to try to have some English teachers talk, or what does this look like in a math class or something? So again, not that these questions are bad, but we want to respect your time. And we said 9 o'clock. So if we could reroute back, and I'm going to turn this back over to Erin, and then we'll have a questionnaire at the end where you can just type all these things to us. And Erin, Brian, myself, we can look at this and really prep for that April, I think we're talking April session, to really dive into what does mastery learning look like from a gradebook standpoint, et cetera. So Erin, I'm turning it back over to you.
Okay. Yeah. And we appreciate all your questions. That was by design, so we could see what you want to know. We won't be able to answer all of them today, but like Brian and Todd mentioned, we are collecting data so we can help better prepare you in things coming forward. So let me change our slide here. All right. So we want to end on a positive note here. And hear from some teachers about how this improved their classroom.
That zeroing in feature, like seeing with the kids the aha moment, like today with the taxes, we went over it on Monday. What day are we on? Wednesday. On Monday, and then today I did like a recap, and the amount of kids that got it. Mm-hmm. Single standard, because that's what I focused instead of spreading out my information.
Yeah.
It made it worth it for those kids, or for the kids to tell me, I went home and I looked at my paycheck, you know, because they have jobs, and I went home and I used that information. Like, that made me feel good.
Don't think of it as like we're adding another layer onto something. Instead, think of it as this is going to make the process of like getting to the standards more clear. So it's not clear just for you and what your own intentionality. It's clear to the students why we're doing what we're doing.
It's okay if students don't complete every assignment. It's okay if they turn things in late. That stuff doesn't necessarily matter with standards-based grading, because they just need to prove they have mastered the standard.
So that's really what it's about. The kids, you know what the kids are learning. You have complete control over what they're going to fix, what they're going to redo, how you're going to do it, and it's really nice. So that's the reason I started. I think it's awesome.
Your PLC can help you feel like you don't have to recreate a wheel that's already there. And hopefully there's at least one person in every PLC pretty much at this point who has got a good amount of experience in there And if first you don't succeed, try again. There's always another day, and we'll always have more school to dive into.
That's right. Love it.
And so I really just wanted my students to change their focus and think more about what I cared about, which is their understanding, learning, and demonstrating their knowledge in the classroom.
All right. So we want to just wrap things up a couple ways. First of all, I guess we sort of answered this one. What questions do you have about standards-based grading? That was sort of what we were talking about in the last portion of our meeting. So I'm just going to fast forward to this poll here. Again, it's the same question that we asked at the beginning. We're trying to see, after hearing some different people's perspectives, are you in the same place? Did we make you feel worse? Did we make you feel better? Again, we're collecting some data, crunching some numbers. So if you would just weigh in quickly here, then we'll briefly talk about what's coming up next.
I just want to add, some of the next sessions will deal with the particulars. You will have gradebook examples, you will have model students, you will have some questions to think about that drive to the point of why is this something that we need to do. So you will start to see how the gradebook weights play into it. You'll start to see how the standard weights play into it. You'll be able to look at some model students, and as a teacher, I want to be able to show you how this will help you and how it's going to help your students and parents. You just can't start at that point. So I think a lot of the questions are really good, and I'm glad there's still some people who are feeling frustrated by like that. There's a lot of red and yellow on the screen, and that's totally fine. But you also got to remember, this is kind of like, we're doing standards-based grading next year. There's a lot of questions. Like today's session, as Todd and Erin have been planning it, and thank you both for doing it, is more like, here's the why, here's the end goal, here's the end piece. We have systems in place. Canvas will do a lot of the work for you. There are things that we can teach you, and just tweaking a little bit of how you present material to students and how you give feedback that will do all of the legwork for this. But the benefits are, you know where students are in the content. Students know what help they need. Your conversations change from, Mr. Bennett, what can I do to get my grade up? Which is the worst question in the world, to, Mr. Bennett, I need help with my cell wall structures. Great, that's something I can help you with. Let's do that now. Students will start to get it as they learn this. And there was a question earlier from Bill about, is this going to start in the earlier grades? Yes. So kindergarten is already standards-based.
Yeah.
Parents get a report on skills that students have, down to letter shapes and how they're pronouncing those sounds, like all that stuff. We're going to build it out for second through sixth grade. 7, 8, 9 is on board. I've done sessions at Westside, Pyramid, and Northside already. So this is something that will be K-12, and you're not expected to reteach this every year, but it's a culture shift. And most research says the culture shift is a 3 to 5 year process, and we're in year 0.5 right now. So this is not going to be perfect in the spring or in the fall, but it will be functional in the fall, and you are supported, and we have materials to get you there, but we've got to pace it out slowly. We have to take time to actually do it right.
Thank you, Brian. So our next coming up workshop, we're going to be looking at things like rubrics. We're going to be looking at the Learning Mastery gradebook, add-ons in Canvas that help you work smarter, not harder. So kind of the nuts and bolts behind this. Again, if you want to hear a broad overview of standards-based grading, you can watch the video from our first training back in November. I think Todd put that in the chat. Or if you just need reminded, if you were there and you just want a refresher, that's available to you as well. But the nuts and bolts are coming up. And we really appreciate you being open to trying something new and spending valuable time here today. Todd has dropped a Google form in the chat. If you would please fill that out for us so that we can get feedback to direct future training, that would be great. If you have other questions or just want some more information, feel free to reach out to Todd or I. Our emails are there on the screen, and we would be happy to help any way that we can. But thanks everybody for coming, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks for starting your morning with us, everybody.